Alright, so I've been noticing the ads lately, and I noticed the government seems to be willing to revisit some of this psychedelic drug use for psychiatry. See, when they fall into this category, okay, so this right here, this, whatever moment that represents for those abusers or victims, essentially sits in the subconscious. And so then, while taking these have a tendency to activate the subconscious a little bit more. And that then they may not have memories, but it might heighten some of the fear and anxieties in the abusers. They're going to be more prone to being the like switch problem, and that then the victims will essentially probably have like kind of a nightmarish response to it. So, since cannabis is technically in the realm that, you know, they kind of call it a psychedelic drug a little bit. It's, you know, I would really view it as that. But the whole idea is that in this realm, essentially what I found is that this tends to be helpful. It does. It, you know, for these people, it makes a happy moment, you know, and like, you know, the difference. If you've ever taken any of these, Molly itself, there's aspects to Molly that might be more along the lines of that, but the whole idea is that sensory awareness kind of stuff is where there's a tendency for these people to be triggered back into the state of mind that they were in when they were victimized in this way. And that then there's a tendency for these people to trigger into the abusive altar that they have lying dormant in their psyche. And so this stuff is like sensory awareness. So one of the things that I know about satanic ritual abuse is that as a victim, the way my body feels, I'm super hyper aware of everything about my body and stuff, goosebumps, all that stuff. This has a tendency to heighten every kind of aspect that's not, ecstasy, I mean, that's ecstasy. I've done that in the past. I didn't like it. See, I don't like drugs. You know, I smoked weed in the past, but, you know, I quit and stuff. And this is like where, yeah, I drink alcohol once in a while. And I smoke cigarettes and I drink coffee. See, what I found was that a lot of these people will suffer from anxiety, okay? They just will. So coffee itself, I can slam a whole pot of coffee like that. It won't be that big a deal to me. It'll keep me pumped, keeps me sharp and stuff. It really does. And then the cigarettes, it's just a horrible fucking habit. But this type of stuff, in the right setting, you know how it's like they used to use that for like couples and stuff like that? See, that is where couples can benefit in a similar way with this type of stuff if they fall into this. See, just drugs. This is why I don't really like. The whole idea is that this is called the witch's flower. And that essentially alcohol has a tendency to like make abusers like be switching personalities in like a blackout drunk state. And then victims tend to get really depressed. basically. And so I don't necessarily get that, okay? But I don't switch personalities either. I don't get depressed. There was aspects. See, when I started to have memory recall, then the alcohol was used on me as a child. Then subversive memories would start happening, and then that would cause a severe depression. And so nowadays, that doesn't happen nowadays because I've worked through it, because I have all the memories, all the stuff. Because I've worked through all the memories pretty much good enough for. And that is kind of like, that is where this stuff, I don't, when I did this kind of stuff in high school or something, I didn't like it. I didn't. I didn't like it. Even when it was in the right setting, like at a camp, basically during the day, after breakfast, you eat some mushroom chocolates or something. Even then, I didn't really enjoy that stuff very much. It has a lot to do with the sensory aspects of the body's awareness kind of stuff, and I just don't like feeling like that. And so then it has a similar, like the SRI stuff is similar to that. It is, and that then essentially, I just always kind of was like this, and so that stuff kind of was beneficial, I guess. See, people are taking disassociatives, and that this has a disassociative effect. So that's but it doesn't fuck with your SRA or your SRI levels and stuff. It's the cannabinoids. And so that's kind of my different theoretical approach. See, I think what's missing is they have the CBD or whatever, but see, the intoxicant, the dissociative effect. I mean, isn't that why he gives the disassociatives, SSRIs, to have the euphoric kind of effect? It's the similar idea here. And that then, like I say, a lot of these people have been through forms of what would be serotonin shock in ways. See, they're taking those drugs and then they're raping their brain apart. And that's basically probably pretty much equal to serotonin shock. Pretty much. So the reality is that I know that they have issues with fluctuating chemicals, and they're always feeding the chemicals in. To satanic S&M is always feeding those pills in. And so then this stuff, this would be like in Mad Men, okay? So the old guy that has the young wife, and they take LSD, and then they have a beautiful night, and then they agree to divorce or whatever. See that would be the kind of setting for the usage of that type of situation, basically. But I don't really think that. See, what they should have done, they should have just smoked weed and had a real good time giggling and stuff. And then they would have bonded together, and they probably would have had a good time. Then they probably would have had sex. And that is essentially where that kind of stuff is basically where a lot of these things that happen in the satanic S&M, they do things theoretically backwards sometimes. They do things that are counterintuitive to the problem. And so they have whole worlds that are feeding these people basically the opposite information as mine. And you see that I can logically, rationally explain the reasonings why to not do this type of stuff. And then when you start when they fall into this category, I tell you, when you start using these kind of things, these people, that stuff it triggers their psyche switching problem. And that what happens when they switch psyches like that is the horrible psychopath protector alter. And you don't necessarily, the reintegration is all about like preventing the switching back and forth stuff, because that's reinforces it. It reinforces it. It reinforces it. And in theoretical reintegrations, you want to prevent that. And so doing things that would heighten the potentials for that is like what you're supposed to avoid. And so logically, you should avoid things that have your mind drifting in these kind of ways, because that's the subconscious. This is just stoned and munchies, okay? This is like a drunk that doesn't make you feel sick. Basically, stoned and munchies. And that's what it is. It's like then you eat a bunch of food and then you feel good. And all these people are starving themselves, trying to be skinny and beautiful and shit. And then they're all tense and shit all the time. And then if they start smoking the weed, then they start eating. That builds towards a reintegration. Then essentially they have fun without sex stuff. Then they start to enjoy themselves. Most of their life is filled with, well, these people, their life is filled with no enjoyment whatsoever. These people, they have enjoyable moments in their life, but there's series of depressions and failures in life that are still plaguing them. These people, once they start chiefing up and eating the nasty cheeseburgers and stuff, then they start to feel better, okay? Most of them are starving themselves as vegans and shit. Honestly, then they start to feel better. Okay, one of the things about always being hungry too is that those people start switching. It makes them prone to switching and shit. And then so that's like where in these psych units, you know, they basically you can eat much. Like when I went to the adult trauma center after getting tasered by a bunch of Richland cops, they had a whole huge thing. I could eat the eggs and bacon and big old sausages and shit and every single fucking day. And I could eat all that I wanted. But see, at that time, right around that time, getting tasered had a lot to do with things that reminded me of my past. That then, in the past, when I was a little boy, I would have like this huge aversion to like meat. And that at the very least, I would eat kosher, basically, because I knew that it was important for me to not be eating vegan and stuff. But a lot of that stuff that I started to remember around that time, that's when my go-to was just to be eating kosher, just because it made me feel better at the time. But in the end, that is where I worked on that, because I don't like to have a food problem, okay? Because the reason I was eating kosher was because of a food issue. And so now I've gotten my way back up on my own. I could eat pork sausages all fucking day long and have no problem eating that shit. But that's because I've worked through the memories and shit and what those do to you when you eat and shit. Right? So the whole idea is that if they end up going to psych units, they should try and put some meat fats, greasy meat fats. At the very least, bacon. Everybody likes bacon. But greasy meat fats, you know, and greasy cheese and stuff. See? And then the women that are always weird about food, being all weird and greasy, if you get stoned enough, and then somebody brings one around, you know, you can have a third of it. It'll taste good. And so, see, these are like the ways that I would use these for anything, ever. A lot of times, during these satanic rituals, like when they go out to the camps. There's basically somebody that goes around with a huge vial of LSD, and they find everybody brings like water canteens. They wait for everybody to get kind of drunk, then somebody doses it, basically, and then they usually have there's a lot of people at it at the camps where they do that kind of stuff. There's a lot of people at it, and so then people have what's like spodies or jungle juice, basically, and then everybody's always dosing that up, basically, and so then people that they end up doing like a satanic ritual out there. A lot of times, these these people. And so then anything that becomes a, a piece of what gets utilized to build the subconscious protection altar a lot of the times. And so then it becomes like a trigger. Then in the other way, a lot of people are just munching on these everywhere and kind of going all weird and crazy. All right. And then you don't want to use those. And then essentially in a more modern way, they have like rave versions of like satanic S&M. And that those people are always like super dosing on Molly and shit. They like take way too much Molly. And so then they do like a satanic ritual. Kind of, it blackmails them into a dark web that they all want to be in. So then, that's where essentially that becomes like, where that becomes a triggering drug that gets used. A lot of these people that are victims, they would have been dosed up for that because it makes the mind easier to split. So that's why the big no is here. And then in some of these more conservative versions, they drink too much alcohol and are in a blacked out drunk state. And so then those people should probably refrain from that. That's where this is probably like, a supplement, kind of. It kind of is. And that those people probably would end up benefiting from refraining from the alcohol. And essentially what happens with the alcohol, I'll tell you what happens. So they get addicted to alcohol, right? And so then they start getting the sweats and the fucking DTs and shit. Then that causes them to be prone to switching personalities and shit. Because the irritability and the addiction and stuff gets them to switch personalities. So they should probably detox. One of the ways to prevent the DT stuff here, the whole idea is that you won't get addiction detox issues off of cannabis, and that it'll end up like making the process for these kind of people, the alcohol withdrawal stuff, this lessens that, and then prevents the like. So those are other ways to approach that stuff. And then in lots of ways, cigarettes, the withdrawal from cigarettes can cause these people in ways, because, if you don't have a cigarette, if you're a smoker like me, if you go too many hours or days or whatever without one, you'll start to get kind of irritable. So there's a potential for that type of stuff too. This can potentially help with that idea too. You don't necessarily smoke as much weed. You would just fall asleep. You'd be too stoned all day. but that, these people with the cigarette kind of stuff, it's, they usually trying, everybody's like trying to quit smoking nowadays. And for these people, potentially like the inhaling of the smoke and the hand addiction stuff, that is where that can satisfy that, and then it takes away the nicotine. Then you can make it past like the 7-day nicotine withdrawal, and then this stuff isn't physically addictive, but it still soothes you through the 7-day withdrawals and shit. And that then for these people, they essentially need to like prevent like the irritable detox issues, okay? Irritable detox issues. That needs to be minimized so that they could see that red integration is about minimizing anything that leads these people into switching psyches, okay? Just is. So any approach to these type of people needs to always be mindful of minimizing the irritability stuff, the hunger stuff, all that shit. The withdrawals from alcohol, the withdrawals from these won't necessarily have, but there might be some in that. They might be doing cocaine or Adderalls and oxys and shit. See, they need to minimize the DT aspects. And that currently, that's probably the only non-addictive way of doing that, because you don't necessarily want them just to be, the whole idea is that you don't want them to be, you don't want them to just be switching to Adderalls, you don't want them to be switching to Klonopins and stuff. It just becomes another addiction that basically will cause the same issues. So that's where there's like a huge concerted effort in negative campaigning and shit about this. I mean, this is, in ways, for this situation, this would be like the best way for those people to go about that. And so that's where, I don't, I'm getting a job, so I don't really care. And I don't have the issues that these fucking people have. That was childhood. I'm 40. And that the things that I did in my life were meant to soothe through memory recall in ways, and that had a lot to do with some of that stuff. And that you people may not understand that this is where, right now, I know that people are actively like promoting this type of stuff, and that stuff would exist in the dark web right now, and that's the kind of Satanist shit that they say to take those. Probably shouldn't take those. And here's the theoretical reasons for that. And that essentially there's just like there's an economic industry that's attempting to push, basically. So that is where a lot of that stuff comes from a completely different angle. And that, so if you're really looking to do some really like decent ideas, essentially the CBD just doesn't have the disassociation ability that is kind of needed for some of these people, so that they're not so on edge and shit. And so then all the SRAs aren't working. This stuff will make them all schizoid and crazy. And then, I mean, essentially, like a Klonopins, those are a potential use. But that's why I say, eventually it becomes a pill poppins. And then they start having the issues again, because they become addicted to Klonopins. And then the irritability starts when they start withdrawing or haven't taken it in a few hours or something. And then they start being switchy again and stuff. And that's where. That's why I know that the physically addictive drug stuff, that and weird psychedelic shit, that's the stuff that maintains that issue. It really can. It really does. They probably shouldn't drink. Also, and that in the past, I didn't really drink that much. And then, yeah, probably have more beers nowadays than I did in the past. But I essentially don't really drink alcohol. I always get a hangover. Basically, I just like to drink beer, and that's just me. But that's where this stuff, this kind of thing nowadays, I don't really get the same like enjoyment out of it that I used to. See, it was something that I would do with friends or with my wife. It's just not really that great by yourself at all. So it's a more social kind of enjoyment, I guess. So if the whole idea is that in a medical way, that is where I found that then that's like where they have the vape cigarette versions of it. I mean, that's kind of what it is. It's like those aren't. This is where I know that doctors, like, you're not supposed to smoke. Okay? And so they have the vape cigarettes and the vape weed cigarettes. And so those are just a vapor, kind of like a nicotine inhaler. It's like that. So essentially, that is like where a doctor could ethically probably, because you get if you're right, that you smoke when you go to the doctor. Then you get the little printout that says you should stop smoking. So that's kind of like where, if you use the vapor pen, don't do the dab rigs. That's weed crack. Okay, that's for the weed heads. Okay, that's the weed head crack. You don't want to do that. You don't want to become a dabber. You can get the little they're just like the e-cigarette that you get at the store. See, and this is what it is that you people should think about this, because when you buy the like Camel brand, they have versions of those that are reputable, that don't have weird chemicals in it and shit. Honestly. So if you're gonna buy those in the store, you should essentially buy the ones that look like the Camel one, basically. And then it'll get you stoned, it will. And then it won't have any smoke. And see, that's the kind of stuff that doctors can't necessarily ethically, they're not supposed to encourage people to be imbibing cancer air. Okay? So this is what I know about psychology. There are doctors too, and I know that you're not supposed to imbibe the cancer air. So there's a real solution here for people that are looking to build some real therapies. And you see that then it's like, if they're in a psych unit, potentially, it's just vapor. Just a thought, some of these people, it's either Thorazine. That's kind of it. Then they're like vegetables all day. And then there's no real like reparative therapy happening. They're just vegetables all day. And so then they just are stuck. Potentially, this could be maybe an exploratory idea of some sort, that potentially maybe some reputable school or something could spark up a research to see what to do for people that fall into this kind of switchy schizo-y stuff. Because essentially, if it's like if they ever get to leave, and they're over 21, it's like, some of those people, if they didn't have everybody making decisions for them, they might actually benefit from like smoking a little weed once in a while. Because a lot of times, what happens, with like when I went to the adult trauma center, I had a few people in there that were schizophrenic, and then when things started triggering them, or when irritability problems, or when the counselor women's would be pissy, then one of the chicks, she would start switching. So it's like, then when we were just kicking it and stuff, and we would all be laughing and being dumb and stuff, then she wouldn't switch. And so here's the theoretical. And so, then there's potentials for just the edibles too. Everybody likes a cupcake. So just remember that there might be some real helpful aspects to those people instead of Thorazines and weird drug cocktails and they should think about all these ideas that I just said, because no, that is bad. You don't want to give people that are already like living in a realm of psychedelia. You don't want to fix psychedelia with psychedelia. Just like I don't believe, like there's people that suffer from disassociation disorders. You don't fix disassociation with disassociation. And then these people, they went through satanic abuse, they live in psychedelia world. And so you don't fix psychedelia with psychedelia. And you don't fix disassociation with disassociation. So that's the whole idea, is that when it comes to meeting, most of these people will be like real neurotic-y. That would be not disassociative. Yeah. And the ones that are disassociative, they should probably, it'll make them drift. It will. So that's the whole idea. It's not all or nothing. You gotta get your boxes right. Once you get your boxes on your person, then you'll know a little better how to approach psychotropics for people with brains that are already living in psychotropic-y ways. Sounds backwards thinking to me. And disassociatives for people that are suffering from drifting disassociations, giving them SSRIs. Sounds backwards to me. And so, I would also include that in that theory too. Like if they disassociate, I wouldn't recommend having like cannabis or anything. Because the cannabis kind of, this is like neurotic, normal. Those people, you can just tell. You can just tell in ways like those people just need to smoke a joint. They'd be like a little fucking nicer.